back for more of the Football History Rewind, part number 47, which reflects on two more of the 6 teams that were co-champions of college football in 1921, the Vanderbilt Commodores and the Iowa Hawkeyes, 2 teams that had great seasons, great players, and great coaching. Their stories and more coming up in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history on a day-to-day basis. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time. So as we come out of the tunnel of the Sports History Network, let's take the field and go no huddle through the portal of positive gridiron history with pigskindispatch.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pigpen, your portal to positive football history. And a few episodes ago, back on the Football History Rewind, we talked about in 1921, there were 6 teams that are recognized as co-champions of the 1921 collegiate season. Well, we've talked about Washington and Jefferson. We've talked about California a little bit. We've also talked about the Cornell Big Red, but we're going to bring you 2 more of those teams in this episode, Football History Rewind, part number 47, the Vanderbilt Commodores and the Iowa Hawkeyes. First, Vanderbilt's up. Another one of those co-champions in that great season in 1921 was the Commodores. Now, the website nextapps.net shares some great information about this team in a recent post on their website. The Vandy 11 outscored their opponents 161-21 for a perfect record of 7 wins, 0 losses, 1 tie, and a share of the Southeastern Intercollegiate Athletic Association Championship with a stellar 5-0-1 mark in conference games. Now, that Southeastern Intercollegiate Athletic Association, or SIAA, as we'll refer to them here going forward. Now, the Commodores were led by coach Dan McGugan, and his 17th season at the helm, a long tenure for a coach in 1921. And it was his first year to have an assistant coach named Wallace Wade. Now, Wade was a fierce competitor himself, and he played guard for the Brown Bruins football team, which represented the East in the 1916 Rose Bowl. Vanderbilt had a tough road SIAA schedule ahead of them, but with the intensity of the practices that picked up on the increase because of assistant coach Wade, hammered into the men into shape and got them prepared for this season that was going to be really grueling. Now, on the home sod of Dudley Field and beyond, their stars included halfback Rupert Smith, and its captain was Pink Wade, father of the future Vanderbilt star Bill Wade, and he was moved from fullback to guard from 1920 to 1921. Other returning roster members included Jess Neely, Frank Godshow, Doc Kuhn, Todd McCullough, Pink Wade, we already mentioned, Alvin Bell, Alf Sharp, and Percy Conyers. Now, Godshow was the first player to follow in his father's footsteps as a Vanderbilt football player. He was a red-shirted transfer. There was a red-shirted transfer. Tackle Tex Bradford, who played for the Texas Christian University for 2 years. After sitting out a year at Vanderbilt, he was now allowed to play for the Commodores in 1921. Now, right out of the chute, they had a tough schedule, as Kentucky and Texas were heavy home favorites, and that's what they were looking forward to in week 3 and 4. Now, week 1 saw them tear apart Middle Tennessee State Normal School 34-0, and in the next game, they crushed Mercer Baptist by the tune of 42-0. Now, the squad of Coach McGugan had then traveled to Kentucky, where there was finally an opponent that was able to register some points against Vandy's formidable defense. Now, the Kentucky team was well prepared, and they had second-year coach William Indian Bill Juneau holding practices in seclusion under cover of night by secured gates, behind secured gates, all locked up. Nobody could get in to see what was going on, and it was dark. Now, the Commodores were outplayed by the very well-prepared Wildcats for the first 3 quarters. Their opponents completed 10 out of 20 passes, including passes between quarterback Bobby Lavin and Fuller. Vandy had scored early And it was fortunate that they did, as it kept them in the game against the relentless Kentucky attack. As we said, 3 quarters worth, Kentucky was the better team. But before this game, Kentucky had never scored against Vanderbilt, and it wasn't enough for the Wildcats, though, as Vandy triumphed 21-14 in a tight battle as they came back later in that game. Next, they traveled to the Texas State Fairgrounds to face the tough Texas Longhorns. Now, Texas was favored by 2 touchdowns by some accounts over their visitors coming in from Vanderbilt. Now, McGugan, the coach, got the team fired up with some really great pregame and halftime speeches, which are just legendary and people are still talking about in the newspapers. And the Vanderbilt triumphed 20-0 over Texas. Now, these were 2 pivotal games, and it really set the table for Vandy to take the SIAA crown, as they dropped Tennessee and Alabama in the next 2 consecutive weeks, both at the scores of 14-0 in each contest. And then their only slight blemish came when they traveled to the Peach State, when they earned a 7-all tie with the defending SIAA champions, Georgia. Now, next up was the Sewanee College, where the teams went into the match pretty evenly, and it was the muddiest game in the history of Vanderbilt, and they escaped with a hard-fought 9-0 win over Sewanee. Now, the Commodores, playing in knee-deep mud and water, were unrecognizable by the end of the game, according to reports. I can't even imagine. They just probably looked like mud figures. Now, the Commodores accepted an invitation to play in a postseason game in Jacksonville, Florida, against the Florida Gators on November 30th. Vanderbilt won this game too, and they ended as the only undefeated team in the South when Centre College lost to Texas A&M in another postseason game, the Dixie Classic. So that's how they got their claim to fame of being one of the top teams in the nation for 1921. The other team that we were going to talk about today, the 1921 Iowa Hawkeyes. And that year, 1921, brought Iowa its first undisputed Big Ten football championship. The Big Ten was a conference then. And it was truly a banner season, as it also brought the Hawkeyes national championship recognition and an invitation to the Rose Bowl. But we'll get back to that in a moment, according to HawkSports.com. Now, Iowa's head coach was Howard Jones at the time, and he had 4 starters that gained All-American recognition at the season's end. Their star, Aubrey Devine, Gordon Locke, Duke Slater, and Les Belding. The highlights of the season included Notre Dame coach Knute Rockne's longest winning streak of 20 games being severed by the 1921 Hawkeyes in an epic contest. Also, Purdue suffered its worst football defeat to date in the history of their program, and the Minnesota Golden Gophers were caught in an avalanche of the most points that had ever been scored on a Gopher team. Both were the work of Iowa's superior 1921 Gridiron team. The one star shone brightest than all of them, and that was running back Aubrey Devine. The versatile Iowa captain and quarterback scored 57 points against Minnesota and Indiana in a period of 8 days, and it was something that had never even been heard of any player doing in a 1-week period. Not even the legendary feats of Red Grange, Herb Joesting, Pug Lund, or Tom Harmon, or any of a host of great backs of the recent years could even approach Devine's mark that he set in those 8-day periods. He was called out by critic Walter Eckersall as, quote, the best exponent of the triple threat the Middle West has seen since the coming of the forward pass in 1906, unquote. Big words by Walter Eckersall. Now, Iowa started week 1 off with a 52-14 drubbing of Knox College, then knocked off the Fighting Irish 10-7, as we alluded to earlier. Iowa scored all of its points against the Irish in the first period. Gordon Locke hitting for a touchdown on a 4th down plunge from inside the Notre Dame 1. And on the next series, the Hawkeyes' Locke and Devine drove the Irish all the way to the Irish 30-yard line, where Aubrey kicked a field goal. Then Notre Dame soon came back with a score of their own, and the defenses held on, and both sides were prevented from getting any more scoring at all in the rest of the game, and thus that 10-7 score, with Iowa being victorious. The Hawks then dismantled 5 straight Big Ten opponents before facing a tough Illinois team, of whom they also defeated 14-2. Duke Slater, Les Belding, and Devine brothers closed their careers a week later against Northwestern in Evanston, Illinois, and resulted in a 14-0 victory over the Wildcats. The Iowa Board in control of athletics met in special session with Dr. William Duffield of Los Angeles, who was representing the Tournament of Roses committee that year. However, after much discussion, the board declined the offer of being invited to the Rose Bowl because of the reasons of Iowa School Board not believing in the postseason play. And the second reason was that they would have to ask the Big Ten conference for permission to play in the Rose Bowl games. I guess that was a little bit too much of a hassle to ask for permission to go and play and send the boys over there, and they probably had to pay their own way at the time, as we learned about Washington and Jefferson and Duke in some earlier games. But Washington and Jefferson was more than happy to accept the invitation in Iowa's place, and that's why they played California for that 1922 Rose Bowl game, and are thought to be some of the champion teams there as well. So it was a good break for Washington and Jefferson, but Iowa is still recognized as one of the top teams, as well as Vanderbilt, who we talked about earlier. So just some tremendous teams from the past of over 100 years ago in college football, and it's easy to see why they were considered co-national champions with the other ones. And we have one more team left that we're going to talk about, and a few more rules from 1921. So stay tuned, as we'll be back in a later episode with part number 48 of the Football History Rewind. But we're here each and every day to talk football history, so don't you worry. We'll be talking about something in football history tomorrow. So until tomorrow, have a great Gridiron Day. Peeking up at the clock, the time's running down. We're going to go into victory formation, take a knee, and let this baby run out. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back tomorrow for the next podcast. We invite you to check out our website, pigskinddispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskinddispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. A special thanks to the talents of Mike and Jean Monroe, as well as Jason Neff, for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? You should check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Pictorum Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. Instead of a boring old tie, get him a historic baseball photo taken by Henry High Sandom at the historic Polo Grounds Stadium in New York City during the 1894 Temple Cup. Or, if he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL poster. These are so good looking that you'll be amazed how they turn out. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order.